Welcome to the Shorten Anime channel. Today we'll dive into the latest episode of The Great Ruler. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support the channel. The Great Ruler Season 1 Episode 55. Within the ink-like dark of night, only a couple of stars could be seen in the entire northern heavens world. It was quite a lonely sight. Inside the ancient forest, various roars resounded out from time to time. These roars were laced with rage. Apparently, since the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy's examination began, a few spiritual beasts had been disturbed by the students. The vast region that had previously been calm and quiet was suddenly being occupied by numerous students that rushed in like a flood. The spiritual beast inhabitants were clearly unhappy being disturbed by them. Therefore, battles would continue to break out even when it was late at night. In the depths of the forest, a bonfire rose. Mu Chen was sitting cross-legged underneath a large tree. He stared at the rising bonfire and entered a trance. This was quite a familiar scene to him. In the spiritual road, he had spent many nights like this. However, during that time, he had a beautiful girl who possessed clear glass-like eyes beside him. When he glanced at her, it was as if the troubles within his heart were being suppressed, and he would calm down. "Brother Mu, here!" A discordant voice suddenly caused Mu Chen wake from the trance. He stared at a piece of dark roasted meat that was being handed over by Mo Ling, who had a foolish smile on his face. At this moment, he could not help but let out a sigh. In his eyes, a hint of depression appeared. Lo Li was definitely better. Not only was she a feast to his eyes, the roasted meat that she made was many times better than Mo Ling's roughly made one. Mo Ling also knew that his cooking skills were quite miserable. However, his smiling appearance still made Mu Chen shake his head helplessly. "Brother Mu, the Northern Heavens world is truly large. We've already walked for 2 days, and we still haven't escaped the forest," Mo Ling said. "How could the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy's examination location be a small location?" Mu Chen smiled. "There are probably tens of thousands of students. Moreover, all of them are individuals who stood out within their own spiritual academy. If the place isn't large, how could they throw them all in here? During the past 2 days, there have been less people provoking us." Mo Ling nodded. Then he smiled and said, "It seems Brother Mu's threat earlier was quite effective. The effects will soon disappear." Mu Chen shook his head. He stared into the depths of the forest underneath the dark sky as he said, "The Northern Heavens world is a vast circular region. We were all at the edges, but everybody is heading towards the center. Therefore, it will become increasingly more difficult to approach the center area. Not only will the spiritual beast become more powerful, the enemies will also become tougher. I've heard some news earlier. It seems that many people are grouping up and forming small and large forces. When groups like that fight, it will be a grand sight," Mo Ling said. Mu Chen nodded and smiled. "That's normal. In fact, you are quite amazing if you can gather a large amount of men by your side during the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy's examination. Moreover, the spiritual beast will become more powerful as time passes. Aside from a few monsters, the others would have to rely on teams. With Brother Mu's abilities, you can definitely do better if you tried," Mo Ling replied. Towards Mu Chen, Mo Ling had quite a bit of confidence in him. Mu Chen let out a non-committal smile. He wasn't interested in doing such a thing. "However, Brother Mu's symbol has already ranked up to rank 4 within 2 days. You've already reached the bottom line for not being eliminated. As for me, I'm still at rank 2. I really need to work harder." Mo Ling stared enviously at Mu Chen's forehead. The latter had a fiery red symbol. This was the sign for a rank 4 symbol. During the past 2 days, Mu Chen had hunted down many powerful spiritual beasts. Thus, his speed of ranking up was quite fast. As for himself, he had worked hard, yet he only reached rank 2. It was still quite far away from reaching rank 4. There's no need to be impatient, it's still early. This examination will not end this quickly. Mu Chen smiled as he comforted him. Then he smiled. "You can guard first tonight. I need to cultivate for a while. If there are any issues, wake me up immediately." "Okay," Mo Ling nodded. Seeing that the situation was like this, Mu Chen no longer spoke and closed both his eyes. The spiritual energy within his body slowly circulated. In the past 2 days, he had always attempted to condense the third limitless death seal. When he had just started, he had still been quite rusty, but he gradually began to form it. Based on his feelings, he felt that he would truly succeed in condensing it tonight. Mo Ling watched as Mu Chen closed his eyes and started cultivating. Then he stood up and extinguished the bonfire without leaving any sparks. His strength in the northern heavens world was only considered ordinary. Thus, he could not give much protection to Mu Chen. It was best for him to be cautious. Mu Chen quietly gathered his thoughts and waited for his heart to completely calm down. Once he was calm, he started to rapidly circulate the spiritual energy within his body. The limitless death seal was a rather peculiar spiritual art. It wasn't extremely powerful in the beginning, but as the number of seals increased, it would eventually possess extraordinary power. On the day Mu Chen borrowed the 9 Netherbirds' power, he had temporarily condensed 4 limitless death seals. With those 4 seals, he destroyed Liu Jingshan's Mountain God Tactics attack, which was at the mastery stage. According to his own speculations, the Mountain God Tactics that Liu Jingshan had trained in was close to a spiritual tier, high-rank spiritual art. However, it was evident that it was impossible for Mu Chen to condense 4 limitless death seals in his current state. But since his strength had increased, he could attempt to condense the 3rd seal. Dense spiritual energy circulated within Mu Chen's body. Shortly after, Mu Chen was finally able to control his thoughts and allowed the spiritual energy to flow through his meridians to his palms. At the same time, Mu Chen's hands clasped together and formed a few unusual hand seals. As these hand seals faded like an illusion, dark black spiritual energy began to gather underneath his palm. By the end of the process, it had formed into a clump of black light 3 meters in size. Spiritual energy was twisting around within the light clump. It seemed that something was being formed within it. As this occurred, overbearing and powerful spiritual energy fluctuations emitted and caused the leaves beside Mu Chen to crumble into dust. Next to Mu Chen, Mo Ling secretly clicked his tongue. He did not know what spiritual art Mu Chen was training in. It actually had such an impressive power. Over time, the black light clump became increasingly small. As the light clump shrank, a black light seal began to become increasingly clear. Buzz! The black light clump had completely vanished, and a black light seal floated on top of Mu Chen's palm. The limitless death seal had finally been condensed successfully by Mu Chen. Mu Chen exhaled a stream of white vapor. He immediately changed his hand seal, and the limitless death seal entered his palm. Boom! The instant the limitless death seal entered his palm, Mu Chen's body shook. An extremely powerful backlash surged out from his palm and charged fiercely through his meridians, wreaking chaos along the way. However, Mu Chen was already prepared for this. He concentrated, and dark black spiritual energy that had been on standby within his meridians swept out. It collided fiercely with the backlash. Buzz, buzz. A deep sound echoed within Mu Chen's body. Inside his aura sea, the spiritual energy light wheel circulated, and waves of spiritual energy were pouring out constantly. It defended against the limitless death seal's backlash. The limitless death seal was truly domineering. However, the great pagoda art that Mu Chen had trained in was even more domineering. It did not retreat against the fierce impact, and instead there were signs of the backlash being resolved. This confrontation within Mu Chen's body lasted for approximately half an hour. Just when Mu Chen started to feel a slight pain within his meridians, the backlash in his body was finally completely resolved. Buzz. Just when the backlash was resolved, Mu Chen felt the 3rd limitless death seal slowly integrating into the center of his palm. It was this way that Mu Chen had truly succeeded in condensing the 3rd limitless death seal. In the dim night, Mu Chen opened his eyes. He clenched his hands and felt 3 limitless death seals twinkling at his fingertips. An overbearing fluctuation emitted. As he felt the power of the 3 limitless death seals, Mu Chen revealed a satisfied smile. By layering the 3 limitless death seals on top of each other, even a spirit stage initial phase powerhouse would have to avoid its might. Brother Mu, did you succeed in your cultivation? Mo Ling, who was watching the surroundings nervously, suddenly asked in surprise. Mu Chen nodded and smiled as he stood up. But just when he was about to let Mo Ling rest, his expression changed. His eyes immediately turned toward the forest in front. A tremor came from that direction. Spiritual beast roars also seemed to start at the same time as the tremor. Spiritual beasts? Mu Chen frowned. He immediately gestured to Mo Ling, and the two of them headed to the top of a tree. Their gazes were focused in the direction of the tremor. The vibrations rapidly came closer, and they noticed a red light after a while. It was a group of red panthers. Looking at them from afar, it seemed that their bodies were covered with flames and looked extremely mighty. They were all flame panthers, spiritual beasts that possessed the strength of a spiritual rotation stage middle phase. With a dozen of them grouping together, even a person at the spiritual rotation stage late phase would have to hide. Mu Chen stared at the group of flame panthers before turning his gaze toward the front of the flock. At that location, a slender figure was awkwardly avoiding the flame panther's attack. "Someone's being hunted," Mo Ling whispered. Mu Chen's eyes narrowed. Through the moonlight, he noticed a little girl dressed in white. She seemed to be even younger than them. Her petite face was extremely beautiful and adorable. At this moment, her lake-like eyes were rippling with panic. How could she obtain the qualifications to enter the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy at such a young age? Although the girl was quite cute, Mu Chen was more surprised at her age. He immediately whispered this in shock. "Brother Mu, should we help her?" Mo Ling asked. It was indeed quite cruel for them to stand back and do nothing, while watching a cute girl being ripped into pieces by flame panthers. Mu Chen stared at the scene, but he did not show any signs of helping out. While she was being watched at by Mu Chen and Mo Ling, the little girl also seemed to detect something. She lifted her face, and her lake-like eyes stared at Mu Chen and Mo Ling. Delight instantly filled her face. However, her delighted expression quickly faded away. This is because it seemed that the two men on the trees did not want to help her. "Meanies," the little girl pouted. Water soon gathered in her eyes, but she bit her lips stubbornly so that tears didn't flow. She was quite innocent, so she did not know why they didn't help her out in her time of need. However, once she thought about it, the other side wasn't obligated to help her. Thus, she immediately rubbed her eyes. Her previous spiritual academy was better. Everybody would help her, but the people here were all bad individuals. She truly didn't know why her parents and the principal wanted her to come here. Right now, she was separated from her sister, and nobody wanted to help her. As they noticed the pitiful appearance of the girl, Mu Chen and Mo Ling's faces twitched. If there were females here, they would probably have charged down and held the little girl in their arms with sympathy. "Ah!" The little girl suddenly issued a scream. While she was desperately trying to escape, her steps were quite disorderly, and she actually fell forward. When that happened, she immediately turned around in panic and watched in terror as the dozen hideous flame panthers came lunging at her. On the tree, Mu Chen finally let out a helpless sigh. His body swooped down like a hawk over to the girl. Since it was impossible to ignore, why not help her out? Within the forest, meat was roasting over a bonfire as aromatic oil dripped down. The oil droplets dribbled into the bonfire, causing the flames to rise higher from within the bonfire. Next to the bonfire, a little girl dressed in white was currently widening her bright black eyes. She stared at meat roasting on the spit as drool was slowly leaking out of her mouth. She was endlessly swallowing her saliva. Currently, her attention was completely captured by the roasted meat. As for the two individuals beside her, she had temporarily forgotten about them. Cough. Mu Chen could not help but cough lightly while he stared at the oblivious girl. He had saved her from the flame panthers earlier, yet she still remained silent. Only after a while, she hesitantly muttered to Mu Chen, "I'm hungry." When Mu Chen heard this, he was dumbfounded. He could only make the best of the ingredients available, so he roasted a flame panther. Although his skill was incomparable to Luo Li, it was still many times better than Mo Ling. The little girl, who was completely focused on the roasted meat, heard Mu Chen's coughing sounds and lifted her petite face. "Little girl, what's your name?" Mu Chen directed a smile at the little girl and asked her, "You're all bad people. My sister told me not to casually tell other people my name." The little girl pouted. She still remembered Mu Chen and Mo Ling standing aside, watching her while she had been helplessly chased by the flame panthers. They had not wanted to help her. Thus, from her perspective, they were as close as possible to being assessed as being bad individuals. If it wasn't for the fact that she was so hungry, she would have ignored them. Mu Chen frowned and lifted the roast meat as if he wanted to throw it away. At that moment, the little girl suddenly became anxious. Her eyes instantly turned watery as if she wanted to cry in protest against the unpardonable crime Mu Chen was committing by denying her something to eat. But Mu Chen remained unmoved. He only smiled at her slightly. "I'm Sun Ir." The little girl finally couldn't hold out any longer, and her nose twitched as she replied in dismay. "How old are you?" 14 years old. With the roasted meat being held hostage, the little girl could only answer the questions honestly. A hint of surprise filled Mu Chen's eyes. 14 years old? She has been able to obtain the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy's qualification at such an age? Isn't this too amazing? Moreover, when Mu Chen looked at the little girl's snow-like forehead, a dark red symbol was there. It was a rank 3 symbol. That is to say, this little girl didn't just obtain an ordinary entry. Rather, she obtained a seeded entry exactly like him. You obtained a seeded entry for the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy, even though you're only 14? Could it be that your family is related with someone high up in the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy? Your strength is similar to mine. You're only at the spiritual rotation stage middle phase, so how could you obtain a seeded entry? Mo Ling could not help but ask. He was disturbed. This was because he felt ashamed when he compared himself to the little girl. Nonsense! The little girl was instantly unhappy when she heard these words. She immediately replied, "You're not my opponent." Then why would someone who obtained a seeded entry be hunted by flame panthers? Mo Ling asked suspiciously. That's because I'm hungry. This reason instantly made the little girl's face flush. She immediately grabbed onto her long pigtails and said embarrassedly, "Furthermore, I'm a spiritual array master. They came too fast and scared me. Once I was afraid I could not arrange a spiritual array." A spiritual array master? Mu Chen and Mo Ling were surprised. The latter stared doubtfully at the little girl named Suner, as though he did not believe her. "I didn't lie to you." Suner noticed the suspicion on Mu Chen and Mo Ling's faces, and was suddenly impatient. She extended her petite hands and her slender fingers twinkled. As the air fluctuated, a blue spiritual array formed in front of her. Then a powerful spiritual energy fluctuation emitted from the array. This? Mo Ling was stunned. He felt an immense pressure coming from the spiritual array. From the spiritual energy fluctuation, he could tell that it was definitely enough to defeat someone at the spiritual rotation stage late phase. Moreover, this spiritual array was formed easily by the little girl. A rank 2 spiritual array master. Mu Chen's eyes focused at this moment. The power of this spiritual array was in no way inferior to his devouring tiger blaze spiritual array. It was already considered to be outstanding among the rank 1 spiritual arrays. Moreover, Suner was able to arrange it this easily. It meant that she had already surpassed a rank 1 spiritual array master. Furthermore, Mu Chen perceived a familiar feeling as she arranged the spiritual array. It was the heart array state. At this moment, shock filled Mu Chen's heart. The little girl in front of him was actually a rank 2 spiritual array master. In addition, she was like him and possessed the heart array state. This meant that she also possessed an extraordinary talent in spiritual array cultivation. Moreover, Mu Chen could feel that Suner had received relatively complete spiritual array cultivation training. It was many times better than his own half-baked training. At the very least, even though he was a rank 2 spiritual array master, there were only a few spiritual arrays he could use. At that instant, Mu Chen finally understood why she was able to obtain a seeded entry and had been recruited by the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy at such a young age. Thinking about this, Mu Chen sighed. There were too many concealed talents within the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy. Furthermore, this was only an examination for newcomers, and there were already so many powerful individuals. Here! Mu Chen smiled as he handed the roasted meat in his hand to the little girl, who was already salivating. "Thank you, brother." Suner's dark eyes instantly brightened up. However, the little girl still thanked him politely before accepting it. Then she stopped caring about her image as she gobbled it up. Mu Chen could not help but smile as he stared at the innocent little girl, with her long twin tails and filled with vitality. The little girl's body was quite petite, yet her appetite was unexpectedly large. She quickly ate all the meat and blinked as she said to Mu Chen, with an embarrassed expression, "I'm still hungry." Mu Chen was speechless. He asked with a wry smile, "How long since you last ate?" 2 days. The little girl was particularly distressed as she mentioned it. She said, "I originally brought a lot of food. However, I met a little spiritual beast 2 days ago and fed a lot of food to it. Since I don't know how to cook, I did not have a chance to eat until now." Mu Chen and Mo Ling exchanged gazes with each other. Both of them wanted to laugh. The Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy's examination was an extremely serious place. How could such an unusual creature appear here? Mu Chen shook his head, picked up some wood and stacked it up. "Brother, you're really kind. What's your name?" Seeing Mu Chen preparing food for her again, Suner's opinion of him was increasing significantly. Thus she asked with a clear and innocent voice, "I'm Mu Chen and he's Mo Ling. We came from the same spiritual academy." Mu Chen smiled and asked, "Based on what you've said earlier, Your sister is also in this northern heavens world? Yes. Sunner hurriedly nodded. She rubbed her stomach and said, however, we were separated. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been hungry. Moreover, if my sister was here with me, I wouldn't have been bullied by these hateful beasts. As she talked about her sister, the little girl seemed to be filled with pride. Her twin tails would bounce up and down. Is your sister powerful? Mo Ling asked due to his curiosity. My sister is someone who participated in the spiritual road, Sunner replied proudly. Mo Ling was surprised. Participated in the spiritual road? Then she was definitely not someone simple. Brother Mu, maybe you know her. Mo Ling smiled as he asked Mu Chen. That's not necessarily the case. The spiritual road is quite large. Moreover, I came out a year earlier than the rest of them. How could I know everyone? Mu Chen shook his head and replied, Brother Mu Chen, you also participated in the spiritual road? Aren't you quite powerful? I also received the spiritual road's qualification, but my mother didn't let me go because I was too young, Sunner said regretfully. You also obtained the qualifications? Mo Ling was speechless. He stared at Sunner as if she was a monster. Just what sort of background did this little girl have? Within their northern spiritual realm, Mu Chen was the only one that had obtained the qualification to enter the spiritual road. Mu Chen was not surprised. It seemed that Sunner was quite talented in spiritual arrays. If they had to discuss her combat ability, she could probably fight against a spirit stage initial phase powerhouse. However, she definitely lacked experience and was quite immature. It's good that you did not go. Otherwise, you might not have been here right now. Mu Chen smiled. He knew how ruthless the spiritual road was. It was truly an outstanding place to hone others. To an innocent girl like Sunner, it was not a good place to go. If she had participated, she might have lost that innocent and pure personality. But whether or not it was a loss for her was difficult for one to tell. Here, Mu Chen handed the roasted meat in his hand to Sunner. Since the girl was quite innocent, he was quite fond of her. Sunner excitedly accepted the roasted meat. Then she immediately buried herself in the meat. The little girl had a truly big appetite, which had only been satisfied after Mu Chen had roasted an entire flame panther for her. This scene made Mu Chen and Mo Ling glance at her tiny body. They wondered where all that food had disappeared to within her body. Brother Mu Chen. After she was satisfied, Sunner's black eyes suddenly stared at Mu Chen, and she asked hesitantly, Can I ask you a favor? Eh? Mu Chen stared at her. Can you take me to my sister? She's probably in this region. I have a spirit board so I can find her. Sunner touched the red symbol flashing on her forehead and whispered, Other people have been trying to steal this from me, so I could only hide whenever I met anyone over the past 2 days. If I get lost while looking for my sister, I will probably starve again. Mu Chen gave her a soft smile. Sunner possessed a rank 3 symbol. It was indeed quite attractive to others. Coupled with her age and pure personality, she would probably be tricked and have her symbol stolen shortly after separating from them. Brother Mu Chen, you're a good person. Please help me. I will definitely repay you once I find my sister. Sunner pleaded. Mu Chen was the first person that didn't try to steal her symbol and had even given her food. As he stared at the little girl's pleading expression, Mu Chen smiled. Most of the people within the Northern Heavens world would have the same goal as them. Therefore, their routes would be the same. He believed it wouldn't cause too much trouble for them to help her out, so he nodded his head at Sunner. It would definitely be interesting to have such an unusual creature following them. That wraps up the content for today's episode. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel to get notifications for the next episode. For now, goodbye, and see you next time.